Good evening, everyone. My name is John Tate, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that McNally Robinson is located here on Treaty 1 territory. That's the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, in the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We are so delighted to have so many people out here tonight to celebrate the launch of Roger Groening's debut mystery novel, Man in the Meadow, to which you may applaud. I will not be introducing Roger this evening, so I won't belabor my own intro too much, but suffice it to say, if you are concerned that there will be a dearth of baseball in this book, be reassured. There will be baseball references. We had the pleasure of launching Knuckleball, which was an excellent collection of short stories from Roger several years ago, so it's delightful to have him back here at the store to celebrate this book, particularly with so many folks here to support and celebrate him as well. Now, I won't take up too much of your time. I just have a few quick housekeeping notes. The first is that there'll be a reading from up here following an introduction, and then there'll be an opportunity for you folks to ask any questions that you might have. If you're located here in the space, please just put up your hand and I'll run over to you with the microphone, Donahue style. Now, this is not any comment on your ability to project your voice. It just ensures that those folks watching at home can hear the question as well. If you are one of those people watching on the internet, please feel free to write any questions you might have into the YouTube chat, and we will put them to Roger as time permits. If you have any positive comments or anything like that as well, please feel free to write them in and we'll pass them along after the event. Now, here to introduce Roger tonight, we have an up-and-coming local author whose most recent book, The Magisterial Away from the Dead, was just longlisted for the Scotiabank Fuller Prize. I won't go on too much about this particular individual because I trust that many people in the audience know him. Suffice it to say, he has had an incredible career, and it's always such a pleasure to have him here behind the microphone. So it's my enormous pleasure to welcome the one and only David Bergen.
Thank you, John. Actually, I'm not the one and only David Bergen. There's a David Bergen that lives on Home Street. Maybe here. I don't know. He writes letters to the editor, and people come up, they write me and tell me, you wrote that letter to the editor? And also, he gets my mail. So I'm not the one and only. Good to be here. I'll just dive right in. Man in the Meadow does not follow the traditional tropes of a mystery. Its main character, Sergeant Arnold Powell, a policeman in the fictional town of Northford, is a man who comes at a crime sideways. He has a wry sense of the world and of himself. He perseverates on how people dress, on their sex lives, and on his own diet. He wants to clean up his culinary life and has great intentions, but then ends up once again at the Dickie D eating a double bacon cheeseburger and fries. And then later, of course, he regrets it. If he is laconic in his approach to solving the local crime, a murder in a meadow, he is also quite tenacious. Like a dog chasing a car, he won't give up. And also, like the dog, when he catches the car, he isn't quite sure what to do with it. All of this is told in Roger's style, which means there are peregrinations. The voice loops here and there, and detours are taken as we learn of the various habits of the townspeople. No one is particularly happy, especially in their marriages. Arnold, in fact, is happiest when thinking about baseball and cheeseburgers. The action is in the dialogue, and much is seen from a distance, tastefully. We don't observe the sex, we hear about it after the fact, as an act of obligation and disenchantment. The discovery of the crime is set within the confines of a baseball game. As John mentioned, there is baseball, which is not surprising given Roger's affinity for all things baseball. Early on in the book, Arnold ruminates on what is attractive about baseball. I'm going to quote here from the book. The numbers are part of the draw, but also the drama of a single hitter against a single pitcher. The beauty of a fielding play, a ball into the gap, a home run, intellectually it has an appeal too. The action is built on a mathematical precision, physics, and never mind the possibilities it offers for colorful metaphors. End of quote. Personally, I've only seen Roger wearing a Yankees cap. Enough said, except to say, I'm sorry, Roger, that this year the return on their investment has been poor, to say the least. Interestingly, Leonard from Knuckleball, the collection that was alluded to previously, Leonard's the protagonist from Roger's previous collection. Another baseball aficionado shows up at one point in this particular novel, and I was happy to meet him again, however briefly. One last thing, and this is about you, Ruth. Sometimes in public settings, Ruth is his wife, for you who don't know, Ruth becomes loose in her storytelling and inevitably says to the writer present, "You can't put that in your next book." I read this novel and wondered if there were any Ruth stories, or if Roger simply ignored the imperative and forged ahead. Roger, it's not easy to write a book, to make it finish. You've done that not only once, but now twice. It's no easy feat. Congratulations.
Well, my goodness, Dave, I thought I had obeyed all of the murder mystery rules. Thanks, Dave, for that introduction. Your support of my writing over the years and your suggesting of the title, Man in the Meadow, which came from you, if you recall, a while back. Also, congratulations on your Giller nomination, as John pointed out. Away from the Dead will be launched here at McNally on September 21. And we add to the rich collection of David Bergen novels in the Prairie Author section. I want to thank a number of people, Mayor Lou Drinker and Mitch Taves. I don't think your guys are here. Both of those two local Manitoba writers wrote a review on Man in the Meadow on social media and on my website, rogergroening.com. Thank you very much. Mitch also has his own book coming up here at McNally on November the 8th, Pinching Spivak. If I'm saying that right? More or less, Spivak. And Mary Lou has done with book launches for now, but she has two books on the shelves here at McNally, 60s Girl and Lost on the Prairie. Thanks to a UK writer, a friend of mine, Mark Billsborough, for writing a review of Man in the Meadow. His helpful writing feedback over the years has been much appreciated. Mark obviously isn't here, but maybe he's watching online. Hi, Mark, if you are. Good to talk with you. Thanks to Wally McLeod, an RCP, retired RCP detective, who is here tonight. We met for the first time this evening, but we talked on the phone extensively during the early stages of this book. Ralph, my brother Ralph, connected me up with Wally. Thanks, Ralph. Wally was kind enough to have this conversation, and it was helpful to me in understanding police procedure, although I confess that some procedural slippage may have occurred. I particularly appreciated the measured perspective on his career that Wally gave, and it influenced the development of Sergeant Powell, my detective. Thanks to my wife, Ruth, for her encouraging support and tolerance of my need to disappear to the farm cottage and make shit up with my imaginary characters. Ruth has an appreciation for the arts, and it shows in her tolerance of my endeavors and in her own artistic activities. At this point, I just want to mention two other people just offhand who I didn't know that they would be here today, but they are. My bookkeeper for about like 800 years, Bev, over here, and my accountant for a long time, Jim, sitting over there. And thanks, guys, for coming. It's pretty cool. Writing is a solitary project. There is some collaboration with an editor. If you're lucky, maybe a quality proofreader. Some contact with a designer, promotional people, and a website person and stuff like that. But mostly you are on your own with your characters and a story that is trying to evolve. Challenges present themselves, so does discouragement, but you persist. Why? Well, because there are rewards. The engagement in an ongoing creative process is stimulating and rewarding in itself, and really quite enough, but not entirely. You get to share your story with others. So thank you all for coming here tonight to allow me to share this story with you. It's my hope that if you read the book, you enjoy it, and you find that your time was not entirely wasted. Seeing as I have a captive audience, and it would be really socially awkward for any of you to leave right now, I want to indulge you in a few thoughts on the murder mystery genre, and in particular, my interest in reading and writing a murder mystery. As a young man, actually more of a boy, my father put me on to the great American mystery writer, Edgar Allan Poe. Poe wrote highly macabre stories that were embedded with satirical humor. The combination of dark tone and humor was fascinating. So was Poe's detective, Inspector Dupin, who attended to the crime scene, making astute observations, deductions, and from this deriving facts that solved the case. This style got picked up on by Arthur Conan Doyle with Sherlock Holmes, Agatha Christie with Poirot and Marple, G.K. Chesterton with Father Brown. Many other great mystery writers have followed with a variant on the model. But what Christie, Chesterton, and Doyle did was form a detection club, a UK group that's still around, designed to set standards for the writing of murder mystery fiction. One of the standards was that the writer should include clues within the book that make it theoretically possible for the reader to match wits with the detective and solve the crime. I think I did that. Of course, the use of dead ends and red herrings are a completely fair game, put in there to confuse and confound. Another idea they presented is that murder mysteries are not only about who did it, but also about exploring the psychology of crime and detection. I've tried within my abilities to work within those guidelines. Why read a murder mystery? Never mind, why write one? Well, I have been a devoted fan of the genre all of my adult life without ever seriously considering that question. Perhaps I should have left it that way. But once the question is asked, the Pandora box is open and it has to be pursued. I came across a Carl Jung comment recently where he wrote that one of the most treasured feelings of individuality is having a secret. Well, we all have secrets. And when I was writing Man in the Meadow, I became acutely aware that I had a secret. Slowly, I came to know who did it and why, and developed the feeling for Sergeant Powell's desire to discover the secret. Further considering the question of why so many of us are drawn to the murder mystery genre, I consulted Google, and as per usual, many foxholes were presented. One of the observations that seemed to have some merit is that murder mystery allows the reader to come close to death without dying, close to crime without being close to crime. Of course, death and crime are real enough, but reading or writing about it within a piece of mystery fiction seems perhaps to lessen for a moment the general unpleasantness of the whole business. But enough about the murder mystery genre. Reading murder mystery is great fun, and I discovered that writing one is as well. What about Man in the Meadow? What is the story about? Well, firstly, some context. In the summer of 1975, I worked as a director of a social services program in North Battleford, Saskatchewan. It's not Northford, it's North Battleford. Okay. As part of the program, we had a drop-in center, and there was a man named Alexander who frequented the center. Alexander would come in with a big briefcase, plunk himself down wearily at a table, lay out his files in front of him, wander over to the counter to pour himself a giant mug of black coffee, and then sit down and begin to talk. He was a Russian Jew who had immigrated with his wife from the Soviet Union in the late 50s. In the late 60s, his wife returned to the Soviet Union to be with her dying mother, but she did not come back. Since then, Alexander had been on a letter-writing mission to get his wife back, or at least to find out what happened to her. He wrote to Brezhnev, Pierre Trudeau, Mitchell Sharp, pretty much anyone who he thought could help him. But it seemed that no one could or would. He seemed to know that his mission was futile, but at the same time, he had a dogged determination to persist. While Alexander's efforts were not successful, his dilemma and the feelings that he presented in our conversations stayed with me, partly helped by notes that I made at the time. Alexander is not precisely in Man in the Meadow, but he inspired the idea of the story, and I want to acknowledge and thank him. But what about the Man in the Meadow plot? Some of you may have looked at the plot summary, and now that Dave has given it a bit of a summary, maybe I don't need to do this, but I think I will anyway. Just read from the back of the cover, in case, that's what I'll do. When a man is found dead in an Astor meadow near Northford, Saskatchewan, on a lovely fall day in 1975, Sergeant Arnold Powell is tasked with unraveling a puzzling case with entirely too many potential suspects. The dead man in question, Clayton Dalrymple, aka Ivan Kulik, a corrupt KGB defector and generally unpleasant person all around, was not the town's most popular citizen. The number of people who might have wanted him dead is extensive, and unfortunately for him, not offset by a list of anyone in particular who wanted him alive. And then there's the question of how he died. The bullet wound in his temple and the handgun at his side certainly suggested suicide. But there were also strange traces of yellow powder on his broken Rolex and his forehead, and a plastic mug of health-conscious breakfast drink completely out of place nearby. Not to mention a second set of overly large footprints that did not belong to the dead man. Was this a KGB hit made to look like suicide? Was the drink poisoned? And what about the yellow powder? Well, under pressure from the RCMP, External Affairs, and the Soviet Embassy officials in Ottawa to rule the death a suicide and close the case, so as not to interfere with the upcoming Canada Cup hockey series or damage Canada's already fragile relations with the Soviets, Sergeant Powell had an abundance of suspects, alibis, clues, and contradictions, not to mention problematically worsening heartburn. The only thing there's a shortage of is answers. And now I want to do a reading. As I was saying to Eleanor, if this was a minister, and I was feeling a little bit like a minister when I was sitting there, that's my Mennonite background coming out. I thought I could say, turn to Ephesians if you have your Bible with you, and we will start reading with me. This is what happens here is Sergeant Powell is going to visit Natasha, who is the dead man's wife, and he needs to tell her that her husband is not coming home for supper. The Dalrymple home was a modern split-level affair at the end of Saskatchewan Street, with a rear door leading to the Northford Woodlands forest. A deep gully separated the backyard from the forest, although an arched wooden footbridge allowed for pedestrians or cyclists to cross over. The gully had minimal water during the summer, just enough to invite birds and willow growth, but in the spring, heavy flows filled the gully. By fall, it was almost always dry, as it was now. A two-car cedar garage was attached to the east of the house. A person could walk directly into the garage from the side door of the house. Arnold glanced into the window of the garage, noting the workshop area and Natasha's black BMW. There was an empty space where Arnold supposed Clayton had parked his Mustang Fastback, which by now was in the police compound. Natasha opened the front door slightly, pausing for a moment, and then recognizing Arnold, she stepped back just as the overhead light in the red and white portico came on. Arnold opened the door fully and walked in. Natasha presented herself with an erect posture and a half smile, mildly warm, but not fully embracing the idea of staying that way. She wore a tie-dye blouse of many colors and a yellow skirt hemmed slightly above the knee. A pair of dressy teal sandals, the kind one might wear for a formal event, adorned her feet. Arnold thought to himself that the rainbow was fully represented in her clothing. "You look like a dancer," Arnold said awkwardly, removing his Stetson hat as he cautiously stepped into the foyer. "I am a dancer," Natasha said coldly, flipping a strand of her straight, brassy blonde hair over her ears. "You know that, Sergeant. You have seen me dance at the Arts Center. Of course, I am not as agile as I was when, as a young prodigy, I left Irkutsk to study at the Balshoi. But that is the past. Time brings loss. I may be past my dancing prime. 42 is not young for a dancer. But the posture and balance of my training has not left me. Can I assume that you did not come here to tell me that I look like a dancer?" I did not, he said. Stupid thing to say, really, my apologies. I am somewhat anxious. We should perhaps have a seat, if you don't mind. Arnold entered into the open space of the family room and sat down on a brilliantly white sofa that looked like it had, until recently, been wrapped in plastic. Perhaps it was, he thought to himself. Either that or it's a recent purchase. Lovely sofa, Arnold said quietly. Hope my clothes are clean. He carefully balanced his hat on the sofa's closest arm. I hope so, too, Natasha retorted, sitting down opposite Arnold in a wood pressed-back chair. She continued in a tone more imperious than Arnold thought was warranted. A recent purchase from Eden's. It wasn't free. I imagine you have come to inform me of Clayton's death. Dan phoned. Arnold was surprised, and it showed. You should have waited for me to call you, Arnold said rather brusquely. Informing family is not a pleasant task, but it is my job, not Dan's. Still, I concede that Dan is correct. Clayton's body was found this afternoon in the Northford woods. Dan said that he found the body. Apparently, Clayton was shot. He was shot, yes, but the scene is somewhat confusing. We have some work to do. Clayton, or Ivan Kulik, I suppose his real name, was never destined for a long life. When you live on the edge, it is easy to fall off. Well, I suppose that's true. So why did Dan call you? Dan and I work together, Arnold. We are friends. He gets excited, can't help himself. He did not intend on offending you. Still, it wasn't his place. He sighed and then got down to business. Arnold explained that the scene around Clayton's body was being investigated as a possible suicide, although homicide was being considered. Natasha took the news with stoic calm. Having been informed of the basic facts around her husband's death, she rose from her chair, seemingly considering the visit to be concluded. But Arnold did not get up. He had further business. He wanted to get some sense of her relationship with Clayton. It also seemed fitting that he find out about her activity that morning. So despite Natasha's body language telling him that he was free to leave, he didn't. Arnold noted the framed poster on the wall advertising an art center play, a Dashiell Hammett murder mystery with the squinting Inspector Sam Spade blowing a cloud of cigarette smoke into space. It reminded Arnold that having a smoke might help relax the mood of the visit. Would you mind if I smoke? Well, if you're not leaving, we might as well, Natasha said. Arnold slowly rose, offering her a cigarette from his DeMaurier package. He lit hers and she smiled ever so slightly, but said nothing. Arnold lit his cigarette, and as he tucked his lighter away, he noted that there were no ashtrays on the coffee table, or for that matter, anywhere in the room. Natasha made no move to retrieve one. To the left of the poster, directly over the fireplace, hung a certificate with a dancing figure and Natasha's name. The certificate had the Saskatchewan provincial logo on it. Was that award for dance? Arnold asked. Congratulations. Your skills have been a great gift to Northford. I won a dance competition in Saskatoon a few years ago. It is always pleasant to have your work appreciated and recognized. Would you not agree, Sergeant? Oh, I'm sure that it is, Natasha, he said, finding himself slipping into more formal speech patterns. I have never won anything, but I agree there is pleasure in being appreciated. Arnold took a light draw on his cigarette. The smoke enveloped and then curled away from his face. He left the cigarette in his mouth for a moment, trying to emphasize the notion that procuring an ashtray might be a good idea. But Natasha made no move to produce one. He started to seriously wonder where he would put his ashes. For that matter, he was curious where Natasha would put hers. Natasha continued to sit with her hands clasped together in her lap, looking quite regal, in spite of the cigarette poking out from between two of her fingers. A small table on her left had a few neatly stacked chatelaine magazines. On her right, a glass-top display table featured a small bronze dancing figure. A long wooden coffee table held a dance figure at each end. The room had a minimalist look, except for the dominating dance theme. Still, Arnold considered an ashtray would be a fitting addition. I should like to thank you for informing me, Sergeant Powell. You have done your duty. Is there anything else you need to say to me or ask me? There was. Do you have an ashtray? He asked, rather more urgently than he wanted. Will you be staying long enough to require one? Probably. Well, in that case, you might want to reach under the sofa and pull one out. I don't like to have them visibly lounging about, Natasha said coolly. Arnold pulled out the smallest ashtray he had ever seen. It was glass with 3 miniature legs and a single indent for cigarette placement, clearly not designed for group smoking. A very small but attractive ashtray, Arnold observed, placing it gently on the coffee table that sat between them. An ashtray's beauty is diminished by its function, which is to hold ash and ultimately cigarette butts. A small ashtray limits use and retains some measure of dignity. At least that is my limited thinking on the matter, Natasha pronounced in a monotone voice. Ashtray size is one of the few things that Clayton and I agreed on. You talked with Clayton about the size of ashtrays? Well, not directly, but we did smoke together every day. And recently he mentioned that he liked this one. I said that I preferred small ashtrays. He nodded and did not disagree. That is as close to agreement as one could get with Clayton. Thank you. Thank you. I think I'm done that part, but if anybody has a question, I'd be open to doing a little bit more talking. It doesn't have to be a question. It could be like a comment. It could be what? Why? Something like that.
And if you do have a question, please just feel free to put your hand up and I will run over to you with the microphone. If you're one of the folks watching on YouTube, feel free to write your question or comment into the chat.
My only question is, where will the books be available? Are they available tonight? Are they here?
Oh, certainly. So we do have books available. You're getting ahead of my closing comments, but yes. So at the end, well, exactly. We will have some books at the central cash desk. There are also some books at the signing table as well. So you can get a copy of the book signed before you pay for it, although we do ask that you pay for the book before you.
Thank you. Do you start off with a plot outline, or does your plot evolve as you go along and take turns that you don't really expect to happen?
Yes, the latter. I mean, in general, I had the place, time, and the characters in mind, and the dead body. I didn't know who was going to do it. I didn't know how it was going to be done. Most of the rest of it is pretty organic. What I would do is go work backwards and fill in my file cards as things happened, so that I knew that that's what had happened, and then could fill with my my grid. I had an Excel spreadsheet of names and date times and that kind of thing, so that I knew where people were at certain times, and what kind of clues they left, what things they said that needed to be followed up on. Yeah, it's pretty organic. I'd say, you know, and then it changes in midstream too, and you have to go back and change a bunch of other things. So, yeah.
It sounds where you're talking is that the story. It sounds as if the way you're talking is that the story has its own idea of what it wants to be, and it kind of directs you. Is that what happens?
I think so. I often wonder, like, I don't think I really wrote this book. It sounds ridiculous, and I guess it is, but it's
So all the characters in the book are fictitious, or are they?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, all the characters are fictitious. I mean, there's things that you see with people and people that you know, people that you've met, that are, there's characteristics and it's, you know, behaviors and things that people say that you picked up over a lifetime that get given to someone. But no, the characters are fictitious, absolutely.
I just wanted to vouch for the fact that those characters are definitely written by Roger, because when I read the book, I kept saying to myself, and especially because I read it before I went to bed, like, where is he? He's right beside me. He's got to be right. And I'm not married to the man, so it seems like he was right beside me, because the things that I just read about were just things that he just says, like they're his characters, and you can see little bits of all of our lives as friends, you know, just moving into the story, because it's just, these are Roger's people, and you know them,
Yeah, you just don't know what they're going to do. Yeah, thanks, Deb.
How long did it take you to write it? And was it continuous or was it a stop and start?
Well, initially, I had a draft that I didn't like and threw out. So I'd say then started again, and same characters were there, but I had a better hook, an angle on what I wanted to do with them. Because the first time that was missing, I felt, and I couldn't get it back. So then a year and a half, I would say. Like, it's been from last fall when I was finished, except for some editing stuff changes, but they were minor. It was 2 years. Yeah, but I'd say in a way 1 year of more intense, where I knew that I had a rhythm going, and I was confident I could pull this off. The first year I wasn't sure, to tell you the truth. Yeah.
Who is your favorite character?
Well, in a way, probably Sergeant Powell. I mean, he's the one I think I got to know best. But I think in a way, I like most of the characters. Annie and Ken, I liked. And Emily, and even Constable Billy, who was a bit of a comic sort of character. Well, him and his wife Vera, but they were fun to work with, fun to have. Like, I enjoyed them, and also for that matter, Inspector Sanders was a lot of fun to have in dialogue. Not giving anything away with. Yeah.
Why Saskatchewan?
Well, that's partly why I did that context about the job in 1975 in North Battleford. That is the place where I met this Alexander guy, and they were some Russian immigrants in North Battleford during that time. And so some of the other characters in the book are, I guess, maybe this sounds like a contradiction of the question about are there any real people in here, but they're a little bit like some composite ideas of some people that I met that summer, which and also in my mind, I had a mindset of a little bit of a map of North Battleford. Not that North Battleford looks like Northford, but it sort of started with a little bit of a grid that I remembered from that. I had a map, incidentally, I drew a map of Northford. I thought sometimes maybe I should put it in the front, but I decided not to do that. Anyway, it might have been a good idea, it might not have been, not sure. But anyway, that's to some degree the psychology and mindset of my life in North Battleford that summer does play out in some weird way in this book, especially with the Leonard character. And I also had an altercation with an RCMP person in North Battleford that summer, which, I was at the age where that was really easy for me to do. So I kind of worked with that a little bit, even though Sergeant Powell was a good guy. This particular person that I met wasn't so much.
So Roger, you've become pretty close with these characters over the last year and a half or two. Are they still like engaging with you and alerting you to the fact that there's other action happening that you might need to be recording?
Yeah, I like the characters. I did get to know them. I felt that I knew them well, and they kept me company. I never felt lonely when you're writing, and I think that any good writer would tell you that. It's solitary, but it's not lonely, because you're with these characters. So when I'm going for walks and hikes, which I love to do, these characters are having dialogue, and that's where a lot of dialogue comes from. I mean, I really like doing dialogue. It's probably is kind of obvious if you read the book. That's plot dialogue driven, but yeah, I have a feel for the characters, and I like them, and maybe I'll play with them again. Yeah.
I'm just curious, like through the reading, it's interesting as I'm dying to read the book. But I'm kind of curious when you talk about the personal piece of the North Battleford. But I'm wondering with this kind of particular genre, whether you learn anything about yourself that you didn't, that you would want to share.
Oh dear, that's a. Well, I don't know. I'd have to think about that. I think yeah, I mean, yes, you learn things about yourself, certainly in the process of what it takes to write something, like working through discouragement, working through feelings of like being stuck in a spot, working, and letting go of self-censorship. There's a bunch of things like that are a huge obstacle sometimes, and so you learn, this Alexander guy who was doggedly determined. I mean, that's a little bit of a theme in my life, I'd say. I'm determined. And it's not like I'm not aware of discouragement and the obstacles, but I'm pretty determined. And I learned that about myself in this, and you have to be. At least I have to be. Maybe for some people it's, I mean, at times where it flows along great, and it's just like easy. Although sometimes when you go back and you read that again and you edit it, you say, well, I guess I wasn't quite as good as I thought it was. Certainly there's that, but anyway, I just think, so in that sense, as far as otherwise, I think it's also imaginary. I think like the things that people get themselves into, they're things that you've read and think about, but the self is a pretty illusionary phenomenon. I mean, I don't know who that is, right? Really. I'm a construct of things that I've met and all that stuff. And sometimes you forget what that was. So, if I read this book now, which I don't think I will, I mean, I'm not discouraging you guys from reading it. I'm just saying, I don't know that I will. I'd be with it for long enough, I think. But there may be things in there that I would learn if I did want it to be a little bit more psychologically analytical about it. Sometimes that's helpful, sometimes not.
So you mentioned self-censorship. Can you tell us more about that and how you dealt with that through the book?
Yeah, I remember that's something that David told me or warned me about a long time ago. I sure noticed it. It's you hear the voices of your family and your wife, and different people in your life, and imaginary people that you don't even know. What are they going to think and that kind of thing. So that's that, and you try to block that stuff because it's not helpful. And never mind what you think yourself, because we all have so many contradictions in our thinking, in our feeling about different things. And so what is it that we want to present to a reader? Ourselves as somebody who's got their act together or someone who doesn't. And so you have to be willing to you have to be willing to be vulnerable to in some sense. Not be bothered by that. So yeah. Well, that's a very good answer, but
Oh, Roger. I read the book. I enjoyed it. Just a few comments, and then I'll finish with a question. I did appreciate the dialogue. Well done. I know you're a very disciplined person. We have talked around the book. I mean, we met often during the construction of the book. but we never did have a conversation about the detail of it. It's probably just as well. It's really well done. And your comment on perhaps including the map, I remember for a while when I was reading the book, I was creating in my own mind a map of the community. So it might have been an interesting addition. My favorite quote in the book is this. This is a baseball reference, which is that he was good enough to make the team, but not good enough to improve the team. I love that. I'm sure that. Here's a question to you, Brother Roger. Very disciplined person, and I respect that quality immensely. What would you consider perhaps for a follow-up, a sequel?
Well, I have an idea in mind right now, which I won't talk about, but I do have an idea in mind, and it might include some of these characters. Yeah, I recently did the Camino for a good section of it. So there's some things that happen there that I think I might work with. Thanks.
Did you write this for pure entertainment? I love reading purely for entertainment, but did you also have some aspect of perhaps a teaching of, I don't know, whatever?
I think I'd stay within the entertainment side. Like, there's always things that we learn about. There's always things that are, maturing, nurturing your creativity just in and of itself. I think it's psychologically healthy. I'm happy with that.
Did you have any self-doubt when the book was released? I've heard that from a lot of writers, that it's kind of a scary, vulnerable time when that book actually is out there for the public to read, and you think, oh my God, what have I done?
Good question, Irma. Welcome here. Well, yeah, I mean, self-doubt lives with you all the time, and you try to, it's a character you want to have in the back of the room, not in the front. So sure, but overall, I like this book. It's not perfect. At some point you stop and that's good enough for now. But I like it. I found it. I read it lots of times, and when I'm editing it, I enjoyed it. I think it's interesting. It's funny, and it has some stuff that's a little bit insightful, I think. And I think the plot line is consistent, and it doesn't veer off too much. I mean, I find it very hard not to veer off a bit, as Dave pointed out. It's very true. Love that, veering off. But I think for the most part, I felt, at least relatively speaking, I stayed with the program, and felt good about it. So, but yeah, sure, self-doubt. But you got to put yourself out there. I remember one time hearing a speaker just talk about, I think it was at Fringe Festival or something, where he was talking about why he was going to Fringe Festival, and he said, he never felt that his act, it was a comic act, was good enough, and that people wouldn't like it. And then eventually he just tried, and he worked at it, and he found, yeah, there's people that like it. You're always you're gonna find people that don't like stuff. It's creativity, art is subjective thing. Hugely, and so some people are not gonna like it, that's fine. But if you have some people that do, and you can entertain some people and find them and add a story to their day, I think that's awesome. And hopefully, I think I've been able to do that. So I feel good about that.
What are your favorite mystery writers, and were you influenced by any of them?
Oh yeah, certainly those 3 or 4 that I talked about a little bit, Poe and Chesterton and Christie and Arthur Conan Doyle. I've read lots of theirs, probably all of Sherlock Holmes stories. And then more recently, P.D. James, Elizabeth George. I've read, I think all the P.D. James stuff. Really love her. Elizabeth George is really good. those would be people, I'd say all of those people were influenced me. But in a way, you know, when I was younger, I read so much Arthur Conan Doyle, and there's something about Arthur Conan Doyle I just really loved. You know, that guy, he was some kind of a spiritualist or something. I'm not sure exactly what you would call what he was, but he had, that came out in the Holmes character. And I probably didn't veering off by talking about that, but he had a connection to Winnipeg, and that's part of what really interested me. And he went to a baseball game. In 1932, he was here for a seance. It was in the newspaper, in the Free Press. And he went to a baseball game that afternoon. In the evening, he went to the seance. You know, he's like a character that I found very intriguing. Anyway, so I'd say those stories really influenced me a lot.
Well, there are no more questions from the audience at the moment. If you have any closing comments you might like to make, Roger, I'll then review signing procedure one more time.
I think I've said enough. Thanks a lot for coming again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Roger. Thank you all for your attention, for being here, and for your questions as well. As I mentioned, we will move along to the signing procedure. That has all been told to you already, but just in case, we do have books at the signing table, and we do have books behind our cash desk. So feel free to get in line and get a book signed or acquire one from us first. Other than that, we'll ask you just to remain in place for one moment, just so we can safely transport Roger to the signing table and get him settled, at which point I will make a dramatic announcement summoning you all over to the table. If you enjoyed this event and would like to watch it or share it with anyone who wasn't able to make it here tonight, it will be live on our YouTube channel. Thank you all so very much for coming, and please join me one more time in acknowledging Roger Bergen.